right, well, everyone, thanks for your patience and sorry about the technical difficulties. My name's Carmen Balber, C-A-R-M-E-N-B-A-L-B-E-R. I'm the Executive Director of Consumer Watchdog. And this is our very first press conference since the pandemic started, and our very first press conference on Zoom. So bear with us if there are any technical difficulties, but I think it's working out. A few housekeeping items. If you missed it at the very beginning, we will have questions via chat. So if you have any questions to ask any of the speakers, we'll take them all at the end. And we'll have an HD video recording of the press conference that we can email to anyone. Just respond to the press advisory or email Mark, M-A-R-K, at consumerwatchdog.org. So that's the logistics. We're here today to talk about patient safety in California and the failure in accountability that patients face every day when they're harmed by medical negligence. California patients have no idea what we're walking into when we step into a doctor's office. We could be getting the best high quality care that we need to get better, or we could be walking into the medical nightmare that all of the patients that are here to speak today experienced when they went into the doctor's office. And we don't know because California's systems of disclosure, for accountability, and for justice, for correction of medical errors are broken in the state of California. Because there's no transparency, there's no accountability when doctors cause harm. Bad doctors keep practicing, cost cutting continues unchecked at hospitals, and more patients are harmed. We're here today to call an end to this dysfunctional system that harms patients at everybody's expense. California has two pillars of medical accountability that are supposed to help keep us safe. The first is the Medical Board of California. This is the state agency that is charged with regulating doctors. So they're supposed to make sure that we're safe when we walk into a hospital, when we walk into a doctor's office. But the Medical Board of California has failed patients. It does not keep patients safe. We have a system at the Medical Board of California where when a patient is harmed, they go to the medical board and complain about what happened to them. The medical board doesn't do its job and get those bad doctors out of practice. Instead, it takes years to investigate a complaint at the medical board. Most patient complaints are closed without any patient ever even being interviewed about what happened to them. The medical board negotiates down charges, so even when it does discipline doctors, they get a slap on the wrist instead of appropriate punishment. Only 0.5%, according to the Los Angeles Times, of investigations ever result in a doctor getting their license revoked. And time and again, we see doctors who have been disciplined by the medical board, and we all know that's not an easy feat, going back into practice only to harm another patient. Repeat offenders keep going back into their office and doing it again. We have a broken system, and it's because of the culture of doctor protectionism at the Medical Board of California. So we're here today to call on lawmakers to enact a patient bill of rights to make patients safer. That would include transparency, a patient right to know what their doctor's record is, a right to notice and participation in the complaint process. So if you file a complaint with the medical board, they have to follow up with you about what they're doing. They have to interview you before they close the complaint. We want an independent medical board. Right now, the medical board is controlled by doctors. We want it controlled by the public. And we want proportionate penalties. So if a doctor is a repeat offender, they have to eventually lose their license. Or if they cause serious harm or death to someone, that they get disciplined appropriately. The choice is very simple. Either we stick with the status quo or the legislature steps up to the plate and makes this medical board accountable to the public. And I have to mention, although we're really focused on the medical board here, that these failures are not living in a vacuum. The other pillar of our accountability system is the legal system. When patients go to the medical board and get no justice, they then try to turn to the legal system. But here in California, a nearly 50-year-old law locks patients out of the justice system. All the way back in 1975, the legislature capped compensation in medical negligence cases for a patient's pain, suffering, for the death of a child, for lifetime disability at $250,000, and that amount has not increased in the last nearly 50 years. It's unconscionable, and what it does is it locks patients out of the courtroom. So not only do they not get justice from state regulators, they do not get justice in the legal system. That's what we want to change. One of our speakers here today is the chair of a ballot initiative that'll be on the ballot in November, the Fairness for Injured Patients Act, that would finally update this outdated law, bring it up to date for inflation, and allow judges and juries to decide in the most catastrophic cases what the most appropriate compensation is. And with appropriate compensation, with appropriate justice, when patients are harmed, then we actually get changes in the medical system and all patients are safer. I will leave it at that. There's a lot more going on, and I might tell you a little bit about it at the end, but there is movement in the legislature. Multiple bills have been proposed, including one to flip the balance of power at the medical board to create a public member majority at the board that we wholeheartedly support. But I want to start introducing the families who are here with me today, all of whom experienced a different type of failure at the medical board and then faced the same problems in the legal system when they sought justice that way. So let me first introduce Charles Johnson, who is the chair of the Fairness Act, and we'll tell you his story.
Thank you so much, Carmen. Good afternoon. My name is Charles Johnson. I am the chairman of the Fairness for Injured Patients Act. And first and foremost, I just want to say thank you to Carmen and Jamie and the staff at Consumer Watchdog for being relentless advocates for justice, not only for this issue of improved patient safety, but for so many issues. And you all have been on this road for decades. And so also I have to just take a moment to just say how extremely proud I am to stand here in solidarity with all these families, all of whom I consider friends, dear friends, and I have such a tremendous amount of respect for. What I want you to understand, when you hear these stories from these individuals, you will understand that these are individuals from all walks of life who have transcended socioeconomic backgrounds, racial lines. This is an issue of patient safety in the state of California that truly affects everyone. No one is safe. So let's get into it. Right now, everybody understands in the state of California, medical negligence is the third leading cause of death. And let me tell you how I got here. I was lucky enough to meet a woman that absolutely changed my life. When we talk about my wife, Kira, we're talking about a woman that raced cars, who flew planes, who was a skydiver, spoke 5 languages fluently. On April 12th of 2016, we walked into Cedars-Sinai Hospital in Los Angeles, but we expected to be the happiest day of our lives and walked directly into a nightmare. We expected to walk in for what was expected to be a routine scheduled C-section at our doctor's recommendation. Our second son, Langston, was born perfectly healthy, and after that, we were taken back to recovery. While Kira was there in recovery, that's when things took a turn for the worse. And we went in for the procedure around 2 o'clock in the afternoon, and around 4 o'clock is when I began to notice blood in Kira's Foley catheter coming from her bedside. I brought it to the attention of the doctors and nurses at Cedars. They came in, they examined her physically, they took ultrasounds, but very importantly at this time, they called for a CT scan to be performed stat. And to me and to my family, that meant immediately. 5 o'clock came and went, there was still no CT scan. 6 o'clock came and went, there was still no CT scan. They began to have conversations about, well, maybe we'll take her back to surgery. 7 o'clock, my family and I are still there asking questions, asking when are they going to take her back for the CT scan? When are they going to take her back for surgery? And by this time, my wife is shivering uncontrollably. She's in increased pain. And I'm still trying my best to advocate for my wife. 8 o'clock comes, 9 o'clock comes, 10 o'clock comes. My wife is still there suffering needlessly. 11 o'clock. It was not until after midnight, 12:30 a.m. the following morning, that they finally made the decision to take my wife Kira back for surgery. After allowing her to bleed and suffer needlessly, while myself and my family just simply begged for them to do their job and take action. And our cries fell on deaf ears. When they took my wife back to surgery in the early hours of April 13th, and they opened her up, there were 3 liters of blood in her abdomen from where she had been allowed to bleed and suffer needlessly for 10 hours, while my family begged and pleaded for them to just make her a priority. When we walked into Cedars-Sinai that afternoon, the thought that my wife would not walk out of that hospital to raise her boys. It never crossed my mind. And as the days turned into weeks, as I began to put the pieces back together, I began to learn about the system in California and how it completely interferes with families' ability to seek accountability and justice. And so we tried our best to get accountability through the medical board, the state medical board at California. The medical board of California failed us. After a 2.5-year investigation, they found one of the doctors that was responsible for Kira's death grossly negligent in her death. Not only that, they found him grossly negligent in the near-miss deaths of, I believe, almost 6 other women. But when they finally gave him discipline, they gave him only 2 years probation, a sentence that was substantially below the state of California's own minimum sentencing guidelines. So when we talk about this systematic continuation of allowing doctors to operate unchecked, this is ridiculous. So not only is it a problem and is it a public safety issue, but for families like ours, it adds insult to injury. If the state of California Medical Board is supposed to protect us and provide accountability, they are falling short and they are failing families time and time again. And we're here standing in solidarity today to say that enough is enough. Enough is enough. We're calling on the legislature to step up. We're calling on the medical board to make drastic changes, to make sure that we have transparency and accountability that will make sure that we keep these medical monsters off the streets. Because what's happening time and time again, when we hear these stories of these families, these doctors oftentimes are not first-time offenders. I want to be very clear. These are people who have a habit of going in, ruining families' lives, and then going right back to their practice unchecked. And so when you couple this system of completely ridiculous nepotism that controls and manipulates this California Medical Board with the microcaps that are literally the most outrageous infringement upon the civil rights of California citizens. And not only that, it's the most outrageous law of its kind nationwide. We are setting the table for a disaster that is wreaking havoc on families in California and has for generations. And we're here to say no more. But the good news is we can do something about it. We can do something about it, but it's going to be up to the legislature, it's going to be up to the state of California Medical Board to step up to the plate and do what they're supposed to do, and that is provide justice and accountability for families. Furthermore, we can do something about it. In November, this November, we're going to put the power in the hands of the people. And the citizens of California will have the opportunity in November to vote on a ballot measure that will do away with these unjust, unconstitutional microcaps that limit the ability of families to seek justice. This November, we are going to change California for generations. And so the reality of the situation is that we are calling on the citizens of California to stand with us in solidarity and demand change. We are so grateful for you all for coming here and listening to these stories. And I just want to say thank you again to all of these families that have showed up and they're going to put your hearts out here. And so, without further ado.
Hi, I am Tracy Dominguez, and I lost my daughter, Tammy, and my grandson, Malachi, due to medical negligence. I am angry that my daughter lost her life and my grandson to a failed and broken system. She had plans for her future. She worked hard to achieve it. Tammy died 1 month before her college graduation. I was left to walk the stage to accept her college degree in psychology. It was not supposed to be like this. A week before her baby shower, Demi began to experience trouble breathing, blurred vision, and extreme swelling and high blood pressure. Trying to seek help for herself and her baby, she contacted her local her OBGYN for her appointment to get in that day, but he wouldn't get her in. So she advocated for herself and went to our local hospital. As she was telling the doctor, the desk station, her symptoms, there was a man in the back in scrubs, and he asked her, "What did you eat this morning?" And she said, "Mexican food." He began to blame her swelling on the food she ate and dismissing all her other symptoms. Demi was admitted to the hospital, but the doctor on call, he never once entered her room. He didn't assess her, and he didn't go over her labs. He didn't offer her any treatment. She was discharged with absolutely no diagnosis. My daughter was sent home, not knowing any idea that she could die. Demi was determined to find help after being discharged that morning. She called her doctor again to get an appointment in and was turned away and told to wait for her appointment in 2 days. I went to that appointment and I watched my daughter describe her concerns to her regular OBGYN, but he ignored her symptoms also. He said the baby was fine and to get bed rest and to get a massage. She did everything she could to get help. She went to sleep that night and had a full seizure. She died at 23 years old in her fiance's arms, leaving her to deliver a postmortem C-section. I blame the doctors for her death. I blame California Medical Board for her death. I sought legal help immediately, but no one would take my case because of the 50-year-old cap on medical negligence cases. The only way I could get help was paying for every aspect of my case. I spent $30,000 out of my own money, and then I was left with no attorney. I am representing myself now. After being failed also by the legal system, I filed a complaint with the California Medical Board. I had to fight every step of the way. I ran a campaign with Consumer Watchdog to bring attention to medical negligence and my daughter's complaint. It worked. It escalated my daughter's case to a high-profile case, but still I struggled with the complaint process. Her doctor was a repeat offender, harming women in Bakersfield and babies for 25 years. I was disgusted that the medical board would allow him to continue to practice. The same doctor was responsible for a death of another 23-year-old who died 3 years before Demi. The medical board gave him probation for that death. And this was not the first time this doctor had been on probation. Even then, the medical board did not follow through with a revocation hearing. 1 month before my hearing, the medical board offered him a deal to surrender his license based on possible health reasons. There has to be a change. We need consumer input in the enforcement process. The medical board must contact the patient after the physician's interview to seek our input. It would have made a difference in my case. The medical board cannot continue to investigate or not to investigate cases based on the physician's interview. We need the medical board to contact the families before they offer him a settlement, or to offer the family the opportunity to give a victim impact statement. We need the medical board reform now, desperately. Thank you.
Good morning. The prior speaker, Tracy Dominguez, is from Bakersfield, California. Good morning. I'm Michelle Montserrat Ramos, and I'm from Los Angeles. I became a state and national patient advocate following the death of my husband-to-be, Lloyd Montserrat. I'm also proud to be the Kathy Olson patient advocate here at Consumer Watchdog, and I have the honor of working alongside all of these amazing advocates. Lloyd Montserrat was an inspiring leader. He was the Latino vote director for the Democratic Congressional Campaign Committee. No matter what leadership role Lloyd took, he was all heart. He was all about helping people and making communities better. He used the system, whether it was local school board races, city council, state legislature, or Congress. He used those systems to help people. And he showed people how to navigate through the system to improve their lives and their communities at large. Lloyd really believed in the system, but unfortunately, the system failed Lloyd. The legal system failed Lloyd, and the medical board failed Lloyd. Lloyd was 36 years old when he died following a botched surgery, surgical site infection, and sepsis. The hospital chose not to tell me the cause of his death, so I was left to investigate it on my own, along with a private pathologist that I hired. I was left with 2 autopsy reports, one from the LA County coroner, who came in and confirmed the results and changed Lloyd's death certificate. The legal system failed Lloyd and the medical board failed Lloyd. Armed with the true cause of Lloyd's death, I sought legal counsel. What I learned was that there was this outdated 1975 law that barred my access to the courtroom and didn't allow me to get accountability for Lloyd's death from his doctor. I talked to many lawyers during the process, and they told me that I did have a case, but because of this medical negligence cap, taking Lloyd's case would be a bad business decision. Trust me, you don't ever want to have anyone tell you that your loved one's life or death is a bad business decision. I was devastated, but I moved forward. I went to the medical board and I filed a complaint with the medical board. I took those 2 autopsy reports. I used the proof that I had that Lloyd's doctor changed his medical records. I used the arrest records, Lloyd's doctor's arrest records. He was arrested for felony possession of crack cocaine and multiple arrests for prostitution. And there were other victims as well. Lloyd's doctor was a substance abuser. Although I had all of this information, it wasn't enough for the medical board. The medical board dismissed Lloyd's case at the Central Complaint Unit, along with 90% of my fellow Californians. They didn't feel that Lloyd's death was worthy of investigation. I have to admit, I was devastated, but even more so, I was angry. I was angry and I was motivated for change. So I continued going to medical board meetings. I became a staple at these medical board meetings, and I fought for policy change. I fought for legislation, and there's a law today based on Lloyd's death that I know is saving lives, but it's not enough. Look around me, we need medical board reform. That's why I will be participating along with my fellow advocates at an oversight hearing for the medical board, and I will be pushing the committee for legislative change. I'm going to be pushing for legislative change to change the burden of proof for disciplinary actions so that the burden of proof will change from clear and convincing evidence to preponderance of evidence. 41 other states already have this lower standard of proof, but not California. If we had this lower standard of proof, then more of our complaints would be would go to investigation. And if those doctors were found responsible, then more of those doctors would be disciplined, and that would save lives. But really, we really need change now. There's nowhere else in the state of California where someone can die and someone can decide whether their death can be investigated or not. But if you die from medical negligence in a hospital or under the care of a physician, all those rules change. Our deaths by medical negligence should not be any different. They're not any less important than any other death in the state of California. We need change. We need change. We need legal reform, and we need medical board reform. Thank you.
Good morning. My name is Tammy Smick. This is my husband, Tim Smick. This is our son, Alex. Yesterday marked 10 years that Alex died due to medical negligence. Alex had become dependent on prescription pain medication following a serious back injury. And wanting to get off those pain meds, he entered an Orange County hospital to safely detox. However, the first night in the hospital, Alex was prescribed and given 11 different medications. And because the doctor wrote an order to only check his vitals while awake, Alex was left unmonitored for more than 7 hours. And when he was finally checked on during morning rounds, Alex was found dead. He was already in rigor mortis. We were in shock that our vibrant, healthy 20-year-old son had died, and the doctor had no explanation. Answers were slow to come, but they did come. And after 6 long months, we received word from the Orange County coroner that Alex had died due to acute polydrug intoxication. In other words, Alex had been drugged to death at the very hospital that he sought relief. So armed with the coroner's report, medical records, which showed obvious negligence, a CDPH report that showed multiple violations, and declarations from multiple medical experts showing that the doctor's negligence had caused Alex's death, we filed a complaint with the Medical Board of California. We were denied access to the legal system because of California's outdated 1975 cap on medical malpractice cases, but we were told by the president of the California Medical Association that the California Medical Board was the place to go to seek justice. So we did. We were certain that this regulatory agency would take swift action and hold the doctor to account for killing our son, but we were so wrong. It was 2 years before the medical board even interviewed the doctor. And then after 3 years, the Attorney General did file charges against the doctor, petitioning to revoke his license. However, a secret backroom deal was struck, and the doctor got away with a public reprimand, little more than a slap on the wrist for killing our son. And for that, we waited 4 long years. The Medical Board of California failed us. They failed Alex, and they failed other patients. They failed to protect other patients from that dangerous doctor. The mission of the Medical Board is to protect healthcare consumers, not to protect dangerous doctors. So in too many cases, for too many years, this physician-led board has not followed their own disciplinary guidelines. They have dismissed egregious cases of harm and death, and as in Alex's cases, they impose very lenient sentences. We need to have confidence that the board, whose job it is to protect us as patients, will do their job. And as stated by a public member of the California Medical Board, this board goes out of their way to protect dangerous doctors. not the public. There's legislation authored that would change the composition of the board to a public member majority, and I fully support that action. So I will be participating in an oversight hearing, sharing Alex's story like I have for so many years. So we, Charles, Michelle, Tracy, Annette, and thousands of other Californians who have been failed by the medical board, we're standing here demanding change. It's time for change. It's way past time for change.
So that's everyone over here. If you guys want to move your mics, I will let you do it so I don't mess anything up. And Evan, if you could move the camera. Is Evan good?
Good morning. My name is Annette Ramirez, and I'm from Manhattan Beach, California. On August 1st, 2012, I went into the hospital for a common surgery, a hysterectomy, and I was expecting to get out the next day. A known complication for this type of surgery is that the doctor may inadvertently cut or slice an organ or a body part. For this very reason, the patient must be carefully monitored for signs of this after the surgery. However, during my surgery, this was the very thing that happened. The doctor cut my colon. Not only did he cut my colon, but thinking that I had gas from the anesthesia, he gave me an enema with a cut colon. Diligent post-operative care would have revealed that problem, but for more than 36 hours, the nurses failed to report my abnormal vital signs, which were the classic symptoms of a leaky bowel. Meanwhile, my doctor failed to adequately follow up to check my condition after the surgery. The result was a severe infection spread throughout my body quickly, causing me to go into septic shock. The septic shock was so intense that it burnt my body from the inside out. 50% of my body had been burnt. The remaining 50% of my skin was used for skin grafts, and even that wasn't enough to repair the damage. Doctors had to use pig skin, artificial skin, and even cadaver skin. It was during this time that I was placed into a 4-month coma. I quickly developed gangrene, and my arms and legs began to blacken. This eventually led to the amputation of all 4 of my limbs. I was in the hospital for 2 years, 2 years away from my husband and my 2 young children. 2 years away from family holidays, vacations, and my livelihood. 2 years away from my life that I once knew, and to no fault of my own. After this traumatic event, it became a top priority for my family and me to hold the negligent physician accountable for their malpractice. This was when we learned the awful truth about California's law that caps the non-economic damages in a medical malpractice case at only $250,000. A law that was enacted in 1975 and has never been adjusted for inflation, capped my 2-year nightmare in the hospital to a mere $250,000. Although we sued and received damages for lost wages and such, The lawsuit will never be enough to compensate for the loss of 2 years in the hospital, many subsequent surgeries, the loss of all 4 limbs, and all the other life-altering costs and trauma associated with my injury. And by the way, he's still practicing. When I finally came home in April 2014 and resettled into my quote, new normal, end quote, we decided our next step was to file a complaint with the California Medical Board. I filed my complaint in January 2015. After waiting more than 9 months and never receiving a call, I attempted to call almost daily. After a month or so, I finally received a basic form letter indicating that the case had been closed. I was never interviewed and there was never any follow-up. It was outrageous and inconceivable to me that the medical board decided there wasn't a reason to cite the doctor that left me as a quad amputee and a burn victim based only on his point of view. We are therefore urging today that lawmakers enact the Patient's Bill of Rights to increase accountability for all patient care. This bill includes a requirement that the board contact the complainant after the physician interview to provide additional information so that complaints are not closed before the board has all the facts. Finally, I am urging all California citizens to vote in November for the Fairness for Injured Patients Act, or FIPA, F-I-P-A, which will update this archaic cap law, indexing the cap for inflation and letting judges and juries decide what's fair in cases of catastrophic injury such as mine or death. I'm going to leave quoting Martin Luther King. Our lives begin to end the day we become silent about things that matter. We together in solidarity will no longer be silenced in things that matter to the lives of injured patients and their families. Thank you.
Thank you, Annette. So we're ready for questions. I think if anyone has any questions directly for Annette, either in the chat or in the room, before we move the mics, I'll let you ask them. Is there anything in the chat, Greer? No?
I have a question. I'm going to come over here though, so she can look towards me. Hi, I'm Christine with CBS.
Hi, Christine.
You mentioned you had 2 young children. How young were your children at the time that you went into the hospital?
6 and 12.
Okay. So can you explain as a mom what that was like to lose those precious years as you were in the hospital, and what it's also like to parent, to come out and parent suddenly with no arms and no legs?
It was devastating to me because I worked for the University of California at Berkeley. I was the alumni director here in California, Southern California. I was very active and I was very mobile, and I was taking our children to school, to soccer practices, and in addition, I was flying back and forth to Berkeley. But when I came back, I was always helping with homework. I always volunteered in their schools, and I was a volunteer in the community. So coming back after 2 years, we had to move from our home of 20 years because it was a 2-story home. This was the only home they had known. And we moved to a 1 level to accommodate my disability. We also moved to the adjoining community where we were at. So it was a whole new environment for them. It was new schools, it was making new friends. And it was very difficult for me personally, to do the things I used to do with them, drive them because I couldn't drive, or be there in their schools to volunteer unless it was on my phone, which I can use with a stylus. I can no longer physically be able to do the things I used to do with my children and play with them, take them to the park and go on the monkey bars with them or do whatever it was I was with them. But I can say that I am so blessed to have a wonderful husband and wonderful children, that even though this was so traumatic for our whole family, that we are still together as a family. And we try to do as much as we can together as a family. And I'm just so glad and blessed that I can be there to watch them grow up. And even though I was 2 years in the hospital, they still came to visit me on Sundays. And I was a little bit of a different mommy, but I'm still mommy.
What was that like emotionally?
Oh my gosh, horrendous. I just couldn't believe that this simple surgery, a hysterectomy, 600,000 women in the United States get this surgery a year. I just could not even fathom that this could have happened to me. And it was just plain outright negligence on the doctor's part.
Greer, is there anything in the chat for Annette? Okay. Questions in the room then?
Can you talk a little bit more about this hearing that's going to take place on Friday and the following Friday? I was looking online, just trying to see if I could find an agenda.
That would be because they seem to be adjusting the scheduling. So as soon as we have the scheduling, we have your email, I can send you the specific information.
So it may not be happening on Friday then?
I'm not certain.
Okay.
Yeah, so it might not be tomorrow morning, but I will get you the information as soon as we have updated.
And I think you mentioned that you were, are any of these folks going to be speaking at the hearing?
Everyone in this room, and in addition, probably 20 other families who have been involved with us and just don't happen to live physically in Los Angeles or Bakersfield nearby to come, will be participating in those hearings. However, they're only allowing remote participation. People can't go in person, so we wanted to give people an opportunity, to speak live, face to face about what is going on.
And what exactly is the reason for the hearing? What are they addressing?
So I'll give you a little history about this. Every 4 years, usually, the Medical Board of California undergoes what's called a sunset review. And the sunset review is the legislature's chance to decide whether or not the medical board is doing a good job. It's their job to oversee and regulate, the board that regulates doctors. And last time around, the board was under intense scrutiny in the media, from all of the families you see in this room and many, many dozens of other families across the state, and by an internal whistleblower who came forward to say some of the things that these patients have said today, that the medical board protects doctors at the expense of patients. And that whistleblower, in fact, has filed a complaint with the state auditor to investigate the board's failures. So there was an incredible amount of pressure in the legislature last year during the sunset review for reform of the legislature. So much so that the leader of the state Senate, Tony Atkins, suggested that we change the balance of power at the board, that we create a public member majority board. That reform got into the sunset bill, got into the legislation that is, that has to pass in order for the board to keep doing its job. But it was lobbied away by the deep-pocketed lobbyists at the California Medical Association. So that reform, and most reforms, didn't make it into the sunset legislation last year. However, the chair of the Senate Business and Professions Committee, Senator Roth, is very well aware that the board is failing at its job to protect patients. So that's what this continuation of the hearings is. The committee, Senator Roth's committee, has announced 2 investigatory hearings to continue looking at ways that the board is failing the public and what reforms need to be enacted. I'm certain they'll happen. We're just working on the timing. I will note that it is extraordinarily rare. In fact, I'm not aware of it ever happening before, that the Business and Professions Committee, the legislative committee that's charged with regulating the board, does so in an off year. Usually they have the sunset review and then it's over for the next 4 years. But this time, that committee said we're going to come back next year, and they're doing it again this year as well. So it really is an indicator of the extreme pressure to fix this board for the better. They've failed so miserably that this is the response.
Got a question in the chat about Charles' lawsuit. an update on Charles' lawsuit against Cedars-Sinai?
Sure. So with regards to the ongoing lawsuit, my family and Cedars-Sinai, we're scheduled to go to trial in May of this year. I believe this trial is scheduled to start LA County May 11th. And so even though we have this microcap in place, my plan is to fight this lawsuit. And it's important to me that Cedars-Sinai will have to explain publicly how all of their systems failed, how their staff failed, and how they allowed a completely healthy woman to walk into their hospital and not walk out to raise her sons.
Charles, if you could also speak to just the maternal mortality crisis as a
Sure.
whole and that new number that just came out yesterday.
Yeah. So for those, and to put this in context, one of the additional things that we have going on is that in the United States, we actually lead the industrialized world in women dying in childbirth. More women die in the United States during childbirth than any place else in the civilized world, in the industrialized world. And what's even more troubling is when we look at the racial disparities that are impacting this, and that what we've seen over the past several years is that African-American women have in fact been dying at rates that are 4 to 5 times that of their Caucasian counterparts. And just yesterday, new data was released that is showing that our numbers are even getting even worse during 2020 at the beginning of the pandemic, and that the racial disparities and the gap in racial disparities when it comes to women dying in childbirth is even widening even further. So what we find when we look at this in the context of the microcaps is that, once again, this is an issue of civil rights, and that the microcaps are even most disproportionately affecting Black and brown people and mothers. And so women and African-American people are being affected even most, and are feeling the brunt of the burden by these microcaps. Anything else? And also, I just want to say too, I think the important part, I want to just add this a little bit of context. I think so many of the families that you spoke to the issue of the microcaps and how it impacts your ability to find justice. I had an attorney that I found, but he continued to pressure me to settle, and I had to part ways with him. So once again, for a long time, I was representing myself, and I met with over 20 attorneys before I finally found somebody that's willing to take my case. And so this truly is insult to injury.
Thank you, everyone, so much for reliving that with us. For everyone on the webinar, thanks for watching. You can email me directly, carmen@consumerwatchdog.org, or copy Mark at consumerwatchdog.org for a copy of the HD video after the press conference, and any additional info we might be able to get you. Thanks so much for tuning in.